clouds still swooping in today. They say it actually might rain tomorrow. There's actually some interesting results from that test, just from my observation that you guys helped with too. I'll get into it a bit later. But what's going on today? I guess yesterday actually I got this notice where apparently there's a new DJI product listed on the FCC sites. There's a couple of them too. So I was like, hey, what's this about? The first one was something called DJI RC Plus. What's this, huh? They show you things like the label, as you can see here, which doesn't really say much other than it has, for example, I guess a built-in battery and so forth. And at the same time, you can see what this controller, I guess, looks like. Is it meant to be like a different smart controller? And you can see here, it looks pretty bare bone, not very aesthetically pleasing, I guess you could say. But perhaps it gives you better range. It is listed under the digital transmission system. And I guess interestingly enough, there was actually more at the same time in terms of some kind of listing. This one here says for TF&RV radar. How would that work out, huh? It almost makes it sound like perhaps this is a thing for their remote ID solutions, maybe for their drones. Would that make sense? So I remember before reading about those listings where they said there's something like that where they can track, I guess, drones and so forth, or at least their own. So maybe that is a way to satisfy the remote ID features in case various places release them. And as you guys know, there's no escaping it here in Canada. That news is everywhere in terms of the Emergency Act, where they basically invoked it, which is meant more for a war, but for some reason they felt the need to do that for the large protests happening. And it was kind of interesting because I was reading at first this article that kind of defended why they need to arrest people or why we have the Emergencies Act, and it kind of gets you to think. So this first one here says, Freeland defends arrest of protesters, says Canada's democracy and economy under threat. MPs have scheduled to debate the Emergencies Act from 7 a.m. to midnight. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland defended her government's decision to invoke the emergency powers now being used to clear downtown Ottawa, saying Canada's economy and democracy are being threatened. That's the one side you've heard, I guess, for the most part. These guys are violent, they're doing this and that, so we have to do this. Whereas a lot of people, even like lawyers and stuff like that in Canada, they're actually suing like the government, saying this is completely, quote, I guess illegal, like it doesn't fit. You don't have the proper, I guess, evidence or information to justify it. So that's what got kind of interesting, because I read another article, which I guess would be the flip side. You can believe whoever you want, but it makes you think. This one here says, Liberals cite CBC analysis to justify freezing bank accounts. That's what they've been doing, where for everyone who's donated to the cause, for example, even if you're just protesting against it, according to them, you're a terrorist. So they've been freezing people's bank accounts. It doesn't matter what they donated, for example, $5 or something like that. And here it says, the incredible powers that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has given his government to freeze people's bank accounts is based on their reliance on an analysis from the CBC. Honestly, the first thing that came to my mind when I read this was like, is this real? Or are you just making that up just because you hate, like, just say, I don't know, the CBC and stuff so much? I mean, I have to consider every single factor and stuff, right? But it says this is according to a 14-page document the government tabled in the House of Commons Wednesday night, detailing the supposed rationale for invoking the Emergencies Act in the first place. On Thursday, Deputy PM and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland confirmed that the banks had begun complying with the government's orders and were freezing people's accounts. The consequences are real and they will bite, Freeland said. While Freeland made it sound as if only truckers with big rigs would be targeted, the rules stipulate the bank freezes can apply to anyone, directly or indirectly involved in the protests. This is the troubling thing if this is true. Because again, a lot of lawyers and stuff, they say this thing is not, quote, I guess you could say illegal. It says, while constitutional law experts and civil liberties groups have said the threshold has not been met for the government to invoke the act, the 14-page document the Liberals offered up presents their own more formal argument to back them up. The actual facts presented are shockingly thin and are mostly a regurgitation of online news stories. So can you imagine that if this is actually accurate, where a large part of their evidence to determine that these people are terrorists and so forth to justify an emergency act, which again sounds like it's meant more for a war, is based on like a news article from like a website, for example, or like in this case, I guess what they say, the CBC, not from like intelligence or something like that, from the military or the police. That is crazy if so, but they even say, well, there might be a chance they do have this evidence, but they haven't actually shown it seems like. And I guess here they kept pressing for information, and I guess they go into their little speeches saying how it's for the best interest of this and that, or it's dangerous. And they said, instead, the only evidence they offer is, quote, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's February 14th, 2022 analysis of the data of the GiveSendGo.com fundraisers list that was hacked and released publicly. And by the sounds of it, it just says they keep going back and forth to this CBC article. And they say here, that's it. No departmental reports underlying this assessment. No RCMP intel. Nothing except a story put together by 3 CBC reporters. That is disturbing if this is true, huh? Again, that's just what they say, but just from what I read so far online when people were questioning them, like even with the police, that's basically what it comes down to ultimately. It's not actual, let's say, intel like they say here. It's based most on what they heard other people say, like that type of thing. That's kind of troubling. Again, to initiate this kind of act that's meant more for a war, it's one of those something doesn't sound right, correct? But what actually made me think here is because they kind of imply here, it doesn't matter how much you donated, whether or not you directly donate it. If you're somehow affiliated with them, then you could, I guess, have things like your bank accounts and stuff frozen. Which was actually the funny thing when I was thinking about it, because here in Canada, I know there's like a party called NDP, for example. They're not like the majority or anything like that, but I suppose if they want to actually fully approve everything, they need the votes from other parties, like they say that Liberal Party. That's just how it works with the seats. And to my understanding, remember how this Freedom Convoy, they used to use that GoFundMe, but then for whatever reason they decided to freeze it? Now, the stories here from what I read, apparently this guy, the NDP leader, his brother-in-law donated like what, $13,000 to the cause, like this Freedom Convoy, and afterwards apparently he had to come out, like this Jagmeet Singh guy who's the leader of the party, telling them like this is wrong and so forth, and for whatever reason he convinced him to take his money back. But hey, if this emergency act says anybody indirectly and so forth could be punished, then doesn't that technically mean, well, I guess you're gonna have to freeze like his brother-in-law's account, and plus since you could be guilty by association, then technically I guess the leader of this party should be what? Indicted as well, shouldn't he? The more you research into it, the more it doesn't make sense, huh? And with that thought, for you guys who commented yesterday for that test to see whether or not, I guess, the platform actually, I guess, tries to hide like certain comments, if that makes sense. It seems like just from what you guys wrote and so forth, and from my assumptions, just from my observations, it does seem like based on what you write, they don't appear like right away, because usually when you go into a video, right now everything is default by top comments, so those ones would be displayed, I guess, first. However, it should display everyone else too, but they should be under it. But the only way to see some comments sometimes is you have to change it from top comment to, I guess, new comments. And it's interesting when you look at which ones were, I guess, buried, if that's what you want to say. Like one of you posted 4 comments. All 3 comments that you initially wrote, they were actually, I guess you could say, hidden, if that's what you want to say. But then the only other one that actually got listed was the one where you kind of joke saying, oh, I'll post this other one for the heck of it. That's the only one that showed up. All the other comments that people wrote, for example, like just saying like, for example, you enjoy the commentary and so forth, and you basically talk about what, just me walking, like those ones all showed up as well. So from the looks of it, like even with the very first comment from what I've seen, that one actually doesn't show up right away. So it makes me wonder if that's because of certain keywords, like you're talking here, what, things like Trudeau and stuff like that. I don't know, like you look at this, it doesn't make sense. At first I thought it would be words like hacker or something like that, but a couple of you actually wrote that word, but that showed up fine. So that's only one example, but I think it's fair to say it does seem like depending on what you say based on certain keywords, your comment would get, I guess you could say, suppressed in some way. So this is just one example, but it kind of fits in from my observations anyways. And in relations to, let's just say, I don't know, the platform and so forth, this is kind of like what you may have heard from other people where they complain it looks like certain videos and stuff, they get suppressed at times. So I guess this is kind of the example, except for you as people who only view it and comment on the subject matter. Alright, see you guys later.